All right. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining the Interfaith panel. This event is part of Bellevue College's Earth Week, where we're exploring topics around the theme of climate voices, sharing, listening, and taking action together. This week focuses on the importance of conversation, storytelling, and sharing of knowledge as a powerful tool to spark action and build hope for a sustainable and just future. So my name is Alyssa Gordon. I'm from the Office of Sustainability at Bellevue College. We have a really great lineup of events this week, so please make sure to take a look at the schedule for the full lineup of events, and I'll post that in the chat so everyone can check it out. Before we get started, I just wanted to go over some Zoom etiquette details. I know we're all pros at this point, but I just thought it would be good to mention a few things to note. So all participants are muted upon joining the session. So we ask that you just stay muted unless prompted by a speaker or the moderator. Also, feel free to keep your camera on as it does make for a little bit more of an engaging session for everyone, but that's totally up to you. We are recording this session to later post on our website as something to note. And so throughout the session, make sure to put any comments or questions in the chat box. And just a reminder to please be kind and treat everyone with respect there. We'll have a Q&A at the end if there's time, so you can either unmute yourself if prompted, or we'll read out questions that were put in the chat box. And then feel free to message me personally if you have any technical difficulties during the session, and I'll try to assist and help in any way I can. So I'd like to read Bellevue College's land acknowledgement to start. We pause to acknowledge that Bellevue College resides on the traditional land and occupied land of the Coast Salish peoples, past, present, and future. That includes, but is not limited to, Snoqualmie, Snoqualmish, Duwamish, Nisqually, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. We honor their connection to the region, pay respect to the Coast Salish elders, past and present, and stand in solidarity through their struggles with continued systemic oppression, and we commit to care for the land and water and center equity at the core of our learning. All right, so now I will turn things over to our moderator for this session, Emeritus BC faculty member, Doug Brown, and he'll introduce the panel and get things started. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Alyssa. And it's a pleasure to be kind of convening and moderating here with four of our respected faith leaders in the region, who I'll shortly be introducing. We are in alphabetical order, joined by Rabbi Yohanna Kinberg, who has been for 15 years and more a rabbi in Western Washington, currently with Congregation Kol Ami in Kirkland, and prior to that, serving in Congregation B'nai Torah in Bellevue. Rabbi Kinberg is also at present the chair of the Washington Coalition of Rabbis. Next, Camila Matamala is an environmental communications professional who is currently working with the Pierce Conservation District, which is a non-regulatory branch of local government supporting conservation projects of local residents. She grew up in the Baha'i community in Oregon and Washington, whereby she developed her passion for nature, social justice, and the unity of humanity. Reverend Rich Lang is currently pastor of Lake Washington United Methodist Church in Kirkland, and has been for 33 years pastor of several congregations in both Western and Eastern Washington, including Seattle's University Temple in the University District, and in recent years served in a supervisory role over the ministries of more than 50 churches in the region. And Imam Jamal Rahman is co-founder and Muslim Sufi Imam of the Interfaith Community Sanctuary in Seattle. He's also a member of the Interfaith Amigos, a speaking more than singing trio of imam, rabbi, and pastor, widely known in this part of Washington and widely profiled in national and international media as examples and advocates of interfaith communication and conversation. We'll be addressing in the short amount of time we have here questions that are both broad and deep, and so we will only be able to scratch the surface. But we can think of this conversation being perhaps the preface and a part of the table of contents of a much larger volume. And over time, I hope that we will have more of these sessions to continue our explorations together. I will be posing 3 questions to which each of the panelists will respond, unfortunately, quite briefly, and we're hoping to preserve time enough for some Q&A at the end, which Alyssa will handle by way of the chat function. And I think what we'll do is I'll invite the panelists in the same order as I introduce them, falling back on alphabetical order as a way of thinking about that. The first question is that the relationship between humans and the natural world is a fundamental religious question. Suppose we imagine a spectrum that ranges from the notion that humans are meant to dominate nature to the notion that humans are members of a natural community without any special status. How would you describe the historic and current conversation in your faith tradition that leads people and communities to place themselves on that spectrum? And if Rabbi Yohanna, you'd like to start, that would be wonderful.
Thank you. Well, it's wonderful to be here and to begin our celebration of Earth Week by connecting with each other through faith traditions. And I loved in the introduction that storytelling is part of this week's exploration related to climate justice, because in the Jewish tradition, our approach to creation and the earth and everything starts with the creation story at the beginning of Genesis, Bereshit. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and then there's a very analytical sort of dividing up this and that and that and this is a part of creation, but God repeats throughout that it's good. And so we come at an understanding that creation, this planet and everything we understand is fundamentally good. And then we get to the part where it says, and what's the role of humanity, of Adam, of the human in all of this? And our role is to be tenders of the garden, of this goodness, to tend and grow the goodness and enrich it and sustain it. And there's a story about a story in the Torah about the Genesis story, a midrash that says that when God created Adam, the human, God showed Adam everything that was going to happen in creation from the very beginning going forward. All the wisdom of the world took Adam on a tour and came back to the garden and said, now look, I've shown you everything. Your job is to sustain it. Don't mess it up, because there isn't going to be another one. And so that was the word from, and this story comes from around 200 of the Common Era, this idea that our job is to sustain and nurture this goodness. And then we move forward from there in terms of understanding how to organize society. And we happen to be right now in a Shemitah year, a 49th year or 50th of a cycle. This would be the year in biblical times when the land was allowed to lie fallow for the full year. And all debts were released. And the way that people ate was by sharing with each other and trading, but nothing was picked or harvested. And so we're in that year right now, and thinking about that one day a week we're invited to let the earth rest, but also 1 year of a cycle we're told to let the earth really rest for a year, and that kind of sustainable vision for the world is built into the Torah, into the 5 books of Moses, which are core to Jewish wisdom traditions. Thank you. I hope that gives enough information to start off the conversation.
Thank you. And wonderful compact brevity at that. Camila, would you like to add a perspective from the Baha'i tradition?
Yeah, thank you. That was such a wonderful story to hear, Johanna. I appreciate that. I think in the Baha'i tradition, or in the Baha'i Faith, the Baha'i faith is a relatively new faith, started in the 1800s.
A lot is talked about nature being a reflection of God's will in the physical world. So I think a lot of faith traditions have this in common. One, I think, really beautiful thing that I just wanted to share was Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, talks about how on every created thing, God has shed the light of one of his attributes. And on humans, he shed the light of like all of his attributes. So these kind of two ideas of nature being a reflection of God's will and how God's attributes are reflected in everything kind of are the foundation of our relationship, and has to do with like it leads to a certain like a respect and appreciation for nature, and nature as being sacred. You know, if you think about like it being a reflection of God's will and attributes. And so it's also a divine trust that we're responsible for because of our greater capacity. And when we live in harmony with nature and the environment, we can learn from it and learn to better reflect these attributes of God in ourselves. And this attitude has been present since the start of the Baha'i Faith. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, was a keen lover of nature, and he likened the countryside, you know, which is full of nature, to the world of the soul, and the city to the world of the body. So he really uplifted nature and its spiritual aspects. And one other thing I wanted to do is I just wanted to sing briefly. There's a lot of beautiful quotes in the Baha'i Faith that talk about the beauty of nature and comparing humans to nature. So I'm just going to sing like a line or two. Oh, I'm going to turn on original sound on though, so you can hear me better. Okay. So that's all. You can hear more of it sometime if you want. I can send it.
Nice voice.
Thank you.
So from the Christian perspective, I mean, Christian perspective is everywhere. I even reflect that. I began in the Christian realm as a end times fundamentalist, thinking that the world was just over and just waiting for it to end. And now I suppose I would be way on the liberal end. And so historically, I think Christians must enter any of these conversations, first of all, with confession and then amends making. I just, there's no way around that. The Christianized worldview turned creation. It didn't mean to, it didn't want to, but the actual practical application of Christianity and also the building of European and Western civilization turned creation into an object. And that object could be exploited for our own benefit, and it could be used and abused because it did not have inherent worth, even though we always believed, always affirmed, always taught that our habitats are gifts of God. We turned it into a very perverse understanding of what that meant. Very egocentric. A quick story I'll tell about my own life is that I still remember I grew up, and well into my adulthood, I was a pastor already by this time. I would be a liberal by this time. And yet creation was kind of an object. It was an other. It was outside of me. And I still remember an experience up in Vancouver, BC, in one of their beautiful parks. I went into this little grove of cedars, and it was rainy. It was kind of a misty, cold morning. And in the midst of that grove, I felt compelled. I could not follow this compulsion to go and lay my hands on a tree. This isn't like me. It's not my nature. It's not something that comes to me naturally. And yet I laid my hands on this tree and I apologized. And it was, for me, an inwardly profound experience. But the healing that came from that wasn't the experience. It was what happened after the experience. And that is, from that time forward, I have begun to realize that I am part of nature. And as stupid as that sounds, there was this block in my head. And I absolutely can tell you there is a block in theology and a block in Christian history that has severed the reality that we are part of creation and that creation is not another. And I think it's part of the cutting edge of theology and of churches today to heal that chasm that has happened, that the earth is not an other. We are part of the earth, and we are, and that our primary job now is to do a whole bunch of amends making. The way that plays out at the church I'm serving now is just real baby steps in trying to get solar panels on the roof and trying to turn our rituals and how we practice our faith towards a creation-centered focus.
Thank you. Imam Jamal.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much for all of you being here. I am delighted to be among what I always call these rectangles of love here. You know, I'm borrowing from Rumi, who says, please come out of the circle of time and enter the circle of love. That's what life is all about. So let me start by saying, what does the Quran? Quran is the primary source of guidance and wisdom for Muslims. What does the Quran say about the human being? The Quran says the human being is fitra, meaning noble, water and clay. Then God has infused the water and clay with God's divine breath. And then the Quran says we have honored the children of Adam. Allah says, I have made you, man and women, my vice regent, my ambassador. You're the ambassador and the ambassadress for me on earth. You have a special covenant with me. Then God in the Quran says, Allah bestowed the amanat, which means the trust, to humanity, which involves awareness and free will. In fact, the human being is so noble, in the Quran, God asks the angels to bow to the human. That's why Rumi says, oh human, you're a ruby in the midst of granite. You have no idea who you really are. Rumi also says, that's why we arrive on earth a little bit tipsy with all these privileges. But we also have responsibilities. God's vice regent. Enjoin the good, forbid the evil. Be a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder to God's creation. But having said that, the Quran also says, and this is very significant, the Quran says, and I'm quoting, the creation of the heavens and the earth is a greater matter than the creation of humanity. Yet humans don't understand this. It goes on to say, oh human, you can never rend the earth asunder. You can never grow in stature like the mountains. Therefore, walk humbly on the earth. Walk softly on the earth. So how do you reconcile these two, concepts? I like Prophet Muhammad's wonderful saying, peace be upon him, when he says, the earth is like your mother. Honor her, protect her. We had a Interfaith Summit on climate change, and the subtitle was, Is this how you treat your mother? And then I love the insights of the Islamic mystics who say the holiest of holy manuscripts is nature. In nature, you find all the divine revelations you need. But having said all of that, we Muslims, of course, have failed in being stewards of Allah with regard to nature. And for many reasons, there's inequity, there's inequality. Certain things force us to do some things which we don't want to do, but we do. Ultimately, I'll end with this. It's really about our level of consciousness. I remember reading a beautiful story of a Zen environmentalist in the 17th century who said that taking care of the river is not about the river. Taking care of the river is not about the river. It's about the heart. And I think that, for me, sums it all up. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, another question that I think is already implied by your comments so far. We can think, in American civic life, we are accustomed to think in the language of rights. How does the concept of rights appear when viewed through the lens of your religious tradition? Do non-human species, ecosystems of the land, have rights? And if so, what would you see as the concrete expressions or the results of those rights? Rabbi Yohanna?
Thank you. Well, in the Jewish tradition, our primary metaphor for understanding our relationship to God is that of covenant, of being in covenantal relationship with God and humanity, God and the Jewish people. And core to showing our commitment to the covenant are mitzvot, or commandments, or obligations. And so from a Jewish perspective, before there can be rights, there's obligation, and understanding our sense of obligation to each other. We can't have rights without mutual obligation as human beings to each other and the planet. And so when we think about civil society, we think about who am and what am I obligated to? And the earth, being obligated to the earth, to a sustainable earth system, is a primary obligation. It's poisoning ourselves, killing ourselves. And so we uplift that obligation, and then we begin to discuss rights. But the core is mitzvah. What do I need to do? Who am I obligated to for sustainability in life? Because any mitzvah, any of the commandments in the Jewish tradition, can be broken or overruled in order to save a life. Pikuach nefesh. So that's the highest value. And the greatest life of all, of course, is one that breathes all around us, the mother that we all are on and are part of. So this is, what do we need to do? We need to do whatever it is we need to do in order to save this planet life. And I think about how Jews have kept kosher and not eaten pig for thousands and thousands of years. And we just didn't do it, right? It was just something we just didn't do. And that's going to have to be the kind of attitude that we end up with through the way we live. Is there's going to be certain things that we just don't do anymore, that are just off limits. And I think that is something that Judaism brings really well, is a sense of things that are permitted and things that are not permitted to us based on our core values and our relationship to God. And for example, on the Sabbath, you're not permitted to destroy creation. On Shabbat, one day a week, you just can't do it. So thinking about how do we set those limits for ourselves as part of our contract with each other and the earth and God, and that we're going to need new limits to set on humanity about our relationship to the planet, because we clearly, as a whole, show that there is no limit to our consumption and our greed around the earth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bella,
Yeah. Thanks, Johanna. Again, it's really good points around motivation and what role religion can play in that. So appreciate that. So I think one thing related to Baha'i views on this is that there's this idea in the Baha'i Faith that humanity is maturing and is in a stage where we're finally kind of growing out of stages of childhood and adolescence into adulthood. And so our appreciation of rights is like an example of how humanity is maturing and learning to better reflect the attributes of the Creator, like we talked about earlier. And so again, you know, the idea of a right is based off this concept of unity and justice. And we can't have unity and justice when any created thing is marginalized. So that's just kind of starting to, you know, explain the Baha'i view on that. Another way to, like another metaphor that I'll share is that in the Baha'i Faith it talks about humanity being like an organism, like the human body. So if any part of the system is injured or polluted or hurt or any way, it will affect the entire system and it won't function optimally. And so this is true for humanity and also the environment. So we're all connected, and each and every one of us has the responsibility to the whole and contributes to the whole like an organism. Both humanity and the world of nature. So our peace, our security, our well-being are interdependent with everyone and everything. And we can only strive and reach that optimal potential when we're in harmony and balance with nature. And when things get out of harmony and balance, that's when those problems occur. So in some, yes, non-human species and ecosystems and everything in creation has rights. And I think that the signs of destruction and disequilibrium that we're seeing right now are, this is what happens when we disrupt the harmony and balance of the created world. It's, you know, it's kind of like, in a way, nature is like reasserting its rights. And in some, that when we learn to and uphold the rights of all created things, humans and nature, and learn to truly live in unity and justice, that will begin to solve the land, the issues of the land and the earth. So that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, the question of do the lands themselves have rights is revolutionary, and I think it will become even more and more pronounced. And go back to something that Jamal had said earlier. This is so much about consciousness. If the land is no longer the other, if the earth is not another, but if there is a kin connection, if there's a communion of beings connection, then we can actually enter, I think, into the kinds of practices and lifestyle changes that are absolutely going to be necessary. They're coming upon us. The crisis of the earth is so intense that we are all, and our children and our children's children, are all going to be paying the price of this for generations and generations, if not into extinction. That's the worst case example. But we haven't awakened to the fact that there is a crisis, because, you know, Simon Kirkland. So Kirkland, we're doing fine. We haven't been so impacted that it's caused us to shift our lifestyle. And we tend to be so wealthy here in the States, particularly in the King County area, that we simply can't see it. And that's the consciousness change, to begin to see the rocks and hills and rivers and trees and the air and all beings being part of our family and part of our connectional system. I think there's two things that have happened that religion, and I'll stick to Christianity, that Christianity has simply not caught up to. And one of them happened on December 24th, 1968, when the astronaut Bill Anders took the picture of the Earth rising. And for the first time, we were able to see ourselves outside of ourselves. And the second consciousness shifter that we have not caught up on in our religious rituals, at least in the church, is evolution. We're still stuck in this Adam and Eve mindset when the earth is, life is 14 billion years old. We have not come to grips with the drama of creation. And so therefore, how do we come to grips with the drama of having a creator, which is at the core of the Christian faith, the notion that we are not flukes, we are not historical accidents. There is purpose and design and a future for us. But we haven't integrated that. Last comment is two great world leaders that are doing that in the Christian realm is Pope Francis and Patriarch Bartholomew. They're trying so hard in such archaic institutions to move the consciousness of Christians towards a creation-centered spirituality.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Rich. I love that that word about awakening, the need to awaken. So the Quran says, for all humanity to awaken to the fact that, I'm quoting from the Quran, animals are communities just like your own. Animals are communities just like your own. They have their own modes of prayer. In fact, Prophet Muhammad, I love this wonderful saying. He said, have you noticed a bird, when it sips water, it tilts its head backwards, upward, not only for the water to flow, but for gratitude and praise to flow heavenward. But of course, for purposes of existence, we choose to slaughter animals. And of course, like in the Jewish tradition, in the Islamic tradition, you slaughter in the halal way. Halal means permissible. With one swipe of the blade, quickly cut the carotid artery, the windpipe, and the jugular vein, so the animal feels as little pain as possible. But of course, now in my older age, that one line from the Beatles really resonates within me. I forget who said that among the Beatles, that if slaughterhouses had walls made out of glass, we would all be vegetarians. Also, I want to say that, in the Islamic tradition, cats are very much loved because the Prophet loved cats. So it's very cultural. And there's a false saying, a fabricated saying in the Islamic tradition for centuries, that dogs are unclean. And guess what? Dogs are very much mistreated. And when, some decades ago, it was proven this is a false saying, it still persists because of the pressure of culture. It takes time for that to unravel, for the truth to go deeper. Okay, what does the Quran say about the ecosystem? The Quran says Allah has set elements of nature in due balance. In due balance, and don't disturb that balance, says the Quran, by your lifestyle, and I will add methods of production, by our greed. Prophet Muhammad, he always encouraged planting of trees. He's got a famous saying, if you're planting a sapling, and just at that moment you're told that the world is coming to an end of the world, the Prophet said, continue with planting that sapling. It's sacred. It's holy. By the way, I love this. I would say this reflects what the Quran says, in my opinion, when this wonderful environmental scientist, Gus Spaeth, advisor to President Carter, and this has gone viral. He said, for 30 years, I thought the biggest environmental problems were loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse, and with good science, we could take care of it. But now I've realized after 30 years, the biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, apathy. Again, coming back to what Brother Rich said, this need to awaken ourselves is the key. Lastly, land, earth. The Quran says, every so where you turn is the face of Allah. It is sacred. I love the verse in the Quran that says, God has created the earth as a carpet, so you may walk therein on spacious paths. And all the sages say, this is about being open-minded, developing an inner spaciousness, because we are so clenched. We fight over the real estate. We kill for that. The Quran says, meditate on the beauty of the land in its interaction with elements of nature. I love the verse of the Quran that says, the earth was parched, but the waters of mercy came down, and the earth was clothed in green. So maybe I'll just end by this wonderful conversation I heard 20 years ago between a rabbi from the settler, and a conservative Muslim who came to an agreement and said, you know, this disputed land, Israeli-Palestinian, does not belong to the Jews. It does not belong to the Muslims. It does not belong to the Christians. It belongs to God. Let's start there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamal. Well, now we're at a time on our clock here in which we can pause for questions from the virtual community here that can be posed in chat. And I think, Alyssa, are you're in a position, I think, to field those and to pass them on. Am I correct?
Yeah, so far I don't see any questions in the chat, but feel free to put them there, and then we can answer them now or a little bit later, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. Thanks. Any questions? Yeah, so we can continue and maybe give time towards the end as well.
Okay, we have one more shared question here that I can pose, and let me toss it out here and then ask whoever wants to jump in, and we'll just watch the chat and see what other questions may arise. The perspective of climate justice highlights the history of environmental costs being imposed on marginalized groups by more privileged groups. By what standard would your faith tradition gauge the responsibility of the relatively privileged? By what standard would your faith tradition assess the legitimacy of privilege? How does this perspective apply to climate refugees from less wealthy parts of the world? And does this perspective amount to a practical definition of the boundary of the human family? Not a small question. Let me invite anybody to jump in there, since we may have some questions from the rest of the community, which will switch us back to that mode.
You know, I'll again, jumping in and starting with confession. I mean, the church has not paid a heck of a lot. This is really a question about also of economics and the hierarchies that we have created. And so who gets dumped on? Literally, where do we throw the trash? We throw the trash in poor neighborhoods, and particularly neighborhoods of color. And one of the awesome things that came out of COVID, and there's not a lot, but one of the awesome things was an awakening in our country, I believe, a sincere awakening among white folk that, oh yeah, we are kind of white supremacists. Like, we didn't think so. We thought we were nice people and we had these privileges, but I think white folks are beginning to grasp more that that our privileges have been based on the bones of others. And so I'm hopeful that the racial conversation merged with the economic conversation will progress despite the reactionary times that we also see.
If I may say one word, Brother Douglas, in the Quran, it says that the real privilege is, and what really counts is doing righteous deeds. And it's repeated again and again and again and again. So it says, the one who is most highly regarded in the eyes of God is not your gender, is not your religion. It's a record of your righteous deeds. And here's a very famous insight by Sufi sages. Jamal, when you die on the day of liberation, you'll have to leave your wealth and your titles at your palace. You have a wonderful community, family, friends, but they can accompany you only up to the gravesite. Beyond that, what propels you forward is the record of your righteous deeds. So the Quran is saying what really makes you privileged in a very positive, life-affirming way is your accumulation of righteous deeds.
It seems that in our world right now, access to money and power are what can keep you safe from any kind of climate inconvenience or poisoning, and that it's those who have less access to resources who end up being the most impacted. And so when I think about the Jewish perspective on economics and access to resources, thinking about that there are, going back to the idea of what's not permitted, that there's certain things that everybody should be not permitted to do, and there shouldn't be certain things that all people have access to, and so that there's an equality there, and that means that there's limitations set for all people. And right now it seems that there's a great freedom for those who have resources to not have to worry about what everybody else has to worry about, which is living, in a poisoned world, and worrying about future generations. And so I think that there's a strong critique of our economic systems, and who gets to make decisions that's implied there, and that we would really be in obligation to each other as a society to change those so that the most people can benefit and live in health and vitality.
You're on mute, Doug.
I know we have one question in the chat, which may help us run out and link to this last question. The questioner asks, how does your work actively today in earth stewardship at the grassroots level? And I wonder if, Camila, since you didn't have a chance to answer the last question, if you would like to be a bridge to that one or pass to somebody else.
Sure. I'm bringing up the question again so I can see it. Oh wait, okay, there it is. I can see it. So I think that, and this is I don't speak for all Baha'is. I just have one perspective. So I hope folks go away from here also, if you are interested in learning more, read about it. But I think one way that I see our faith working actively at the grassroots is at this kind of importance of service. I think it's very similar to what Jamal was saying. It's the highest station a person can achieve is one of service to humanity. And what that looks like practically is, I can share my own experience is working with middle schoolers. So a lot of Baha'is, there's this program called the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program. And it's based off of a lot of effort is put into this based off of experience in the Baha'i community, seeing that middle school is an age where you really make a lot of decisions that are going to define the rest of your life, and you're really building your moral framework. So when I work with these groups, it's often on the neighborhood level, and what I'm doing and part of what the program is helping them to like understand the world better, understand what's happening in their neighborhood, and that I think that you develop this ability to observe and have insight into your local space and the world, which I think is something that is really lacking in a lot of people. Even myself starting the program, I think it's really hard to like look at your neighborhood and be like, what are the issues here? Like, why are people just littering all over the place? Not like I want there to not be litter, but like, why is this happening? And what could I do with my friends to change this? And so I think on a very practical level, working with young people to be able to observe what's happening around them, like me as an animator, which is what the person is who leads the group, like I can go around and we're walking and I'll be like, I'll point out an invasive species and be like, tell them about it, and help them to start to observe those things within themselves. And some of the books that they study are even about the environment and science and also like how we relate to people. But I think in a practical level, I personally think that impacting the young people in this way, like I don't know, it has such a lasting impact on improving the world, because really the children and the youth are our future, and that's where we can have the most impact. So on a practical matter, that's one thing that Baha'is are doing. And what I also love about this is it's not just Baha'is, it's Baha'is and friends and anybody who's like, this is important, anybody's involved. So it's not just Baha'i kids who are doing this. We write the program in such a way that it has a spiritual foundation, but like you don't need to be a Baha'i to participate. And so it's also bringing together people of different faiths or people who aren't religious, and anybody who can lead a group too. Like I've led multiple groups with people who are not Baha'is. So if anybody's interested in learning more about that too, like message me. I found it like also so rewarding. And the thing, I'll just say one more thing, is when you work with this age group, they're really good at calling you out on any hypocrisy that you have. So it also helps you to become a better person as you're doing it. And so, you know, yeah, that's, I'm not good at ending things, but that's, I think a really important part of it. One example of the grassroots.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Alyssa, you will have to tell us whether we have any time left. It looks to me as though the answer may be no.
Yep, just a few moments to wrap up, I think. And then I know students have to run off to classes.
Right. Well, then let me ask if any of the other panelists have a response to that question from the community.
Now, I'd do a shout out to a group of folks called Earth Ministry. And they are increasingly interfaith in their perspective. And they help train and equip congregations not only on lifestyle changes, but also organizing political advocacy. And I think they're a great gift.
If I may just add to that, a quote by Prophet Muhammad, who said, in these matters, do good deeds according to your capacity. And the good deeds most loved by God are the ones that are done regularly, no matter how small they are. So for example, besides reducing my carbon footprint, I make it a daily practice to send light and love to nature, to animals, and also to ask for forgiveness. You know, the sages say, do you know somebody who has been abused, plundered, exploited, how that person feels if even one person says, please forgive me? It matters. It is healing. So sending light, say, please forgive me, besides all the other things we could be doing, for me is very meaningful.
Well, let me thank all of you for your contributions and all of the participants online for being involved and contributing to the energy here. And I will leave it to Alyssa to undertake whatever electronic wrap-up we need. And I can tell the panelists that we may have a couple of minutes here that we can debrief, depending on how the wrap-up of the electronic side goes.
That's good. I just want to say thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, panelists. We really appreciate your different perspectives. It was such a wonderful session. I know I really enjoyed it, and I hope this will help people have meaningful and engaging conversations surrounding the topics of climate change and earth stewardship. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. Make sure to check out the rest of the Earth Week schedule. I just posted in the chat, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Well, let me thank all the panelists again. And to tell you that I hope we will continue to be in touch on these matters. And I'll be sending each of you an alert to another part of the Earth Week undertakings that is new compared with past years. There is a small group of us emeritus faculty who are in transition, if you will, from our inward-facing work with students at the college to a more outward-facing orientation with respect to the community. And we have an event this Saturday, which is in that spirit. And I'll send you some details in case it may be of interest to you or other folks that you know in your congregations. It's awfully short notice, and therefore I don't suggest that I'm asking it be widely broadcast on that such short notice, but you may know some people who would like to know, and we'd be certainly glad to see that group join us. It's focused on how to have constructive conversations about climate crisis within one's friendship and family and professional networks, since that's a critical step that is often not going on around us now. Any final comments from anybody?
So just so wonderful to be here. And I know, Jamal, that that through Northwest Interfaith, there's a climate conference coming up.
Yes, yes. I think July 31st, I forget the exact date, but we have a citywide interfaith program on climate change. That's right. Thank you so much for reminding us.
Well, this is my first year as being part of helping with the group to be part of it. I'm really excited. So
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing people on more future activities and panels and sharing together.
So Jamal, would you be the person to inquire about for more details?
Yes, yes. In fact, what I could do, Doug, is put you on the list to send the flyer and more information to.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you. And thanks, Brother Richards. Yeah, thank you. Sister Johanna.
Plant a tree. That's all I have to say. There's so many opportunities to plant trees during Earth Week and on the weekend. So, look up your local conservation district. If you don't know where to go, you could go on volunteer match. I know we have opportunities if you want to go to Pierce County, but that's a little bit far. There's definitely stuff close to you. But yeah, thank you for inviting me, and I hope it was helpful.
Yes, much better.
Thank you all.
Thank you.